welcome. You're watching NewsX Nation at 9 with me, Meenakshi Upreti. The top focus of this bulletin, Prime Minister Narendra Modi's virtual meeting with Scott Morrison. PM Modi has held the second virtual summit with his Australian counterpart, Mr. Morrison, today, marking the establishment of a mechanism for India and Australia to hold annual summits for the review of a bilateral relationship. Now, the virtual meet comes in the backdrop of a war in Europe. As the battle between Russia and Ukraine continues, leaders of Quad have been quick to hold meetings with India, announcing a plethora of investment plans and reiterating the importance of a stable Quad for an open and free Indo-Pacific. Just 2 days after the Japanese Prime Minister's visit to India, Australia and India have held their virtual summit. Next is the visit of the Israeli Prime Minister in India in April. Now, amidst the global changing order and scenario, has India emerged as a key player in the new multipolar world? Let's listen in to what Prime Minister Narendra Modi and Scott Morrison had to say, and then we take this conversation forward.
कोर में भी हमारे बीच अच्छा सहयोग चल रहा है। हमारा यह सहयोग फ्री, ओपन और इंक्लूसिव इंडो पैसिफिक के प्रति हमारी प्रतिबद्धता को दर्शाता है। क्षेत्रीय और वैश्विक स्थिरता के लिए क्वाड की सफलता बहुत महत्वपूर्ण है।
Our meeting today is, of course, set against a very distressing backdrop of the war in Europe, which must never happen in our own region. And I very much want to thank you for the partnership that we have. But cooperation between like-minded liberal democracies is key to an open and inclusive and resilient and prosperous Indo-Pacific. And I welcome your leadership within the Quad to keeping us focused on those important issues.
Well, and I'm being joined by Ambassador Basmati Mukherjee, former diplomat. Robinder Sachdev, international affairs expert, is also with us. We also have Sanjay Kapoor, editor, Hard News, and also a foreign affairs journalist. Madhav Nalapad, sir, editorial director of the Sunday Guardian. I'm going to start first of all with you, Basmati Mukherjee. Ma'am, as a former diplomat, the fact that Scott Morrison makes an honorable mention of Ukraine, but at the end of the day endorses literally India's stand when it comes to one of the most contentious issues perhaps which the world is facing as of now. It really is a testament really to India's diplomacy, a vindication of the stand which India has taken till date.
That one of the most significant takeaways of Prime Minister Morrison's statement, which we just heard, was when he said that we would not like to have a similar situation in our region as happened in Europe. In other words, Australia, as our important Quad partner, recognizes, maybe better than some of the other European Union countries or even United States for that matter, that the danger is of a resurgent militaristic China in the Indo-Pacific, and that we should not get bogged down by what's happening in Europe. We should prepare for the next challenge, which is a buoyant, reinvigorated China with its junior partner, unfortunately, Russian Federation, trying to now become more aggressive in its neighborhood, with India, Indo-Pacific, with Taiwan, etc. And it is very heartening that the Australian Prime Minister has understood, because that is India's concern. And as you rightly say, if we have managed to put this across, and for the Australian Prime Minister, our important Quad partner, to understand and articulate that concern, it means that India's concerns are being heard loud and clear among her strategic partners, and that the West is not forgetting the danger that China poses to international peace and security, and not get diverted too much by the terrible events which are unfolding day by day in Ukraine.
Well, absolutely. And ma'am, we cannot ignore the dragon in the room. And Scott Morrison, of course, has his eyes on China. That has not really moved. But Robinder Sachdev, we did, of course, establish a vindication of the stand which India has taken, but also the fact that right now we have Scott Morrison. Earlier, we have, of course, the Japanese Prime Minister. In a few days, we'll have the Israeli Prime Minister. We have US officials also who will be visiting India. Clear indication of India's growing global might. All these powers visiting India, making a beeline to woo India, even leaving aside India's stand on Russia.
Yeah, absolutely so. Absolutely so to some extent. But I think we should not get carried away also. I mean, but definitely our foreign policy situation right now is pretty good and it's going good. In the sense that both the camps, the Russian side and the American and the liberal democratic, this thing which is coming up. So so far so good. My question or my thought is that, you see, we will be tested or we will test at the moment of some next Chinese misadventure with India. Okay, let's say in the next 6 months, next 1 year or something, China would very probably be doing something. Now, at that point of time, what would we need? Of course, we'll have our own defense and military readiness and etc. But would that be an occasion in which we would need the support of quote unquote the West? Okay, will they come with us? Okay, or you remember, I mean, the US spokesperson, she's been saying a word very often. Remember the history books. I mean, that's what she said in response to India's stand. She said, yeah, we very much understand, but you should realize that how history books will write about you in the future. That she said about India. And 2 or 3 days later, while talking about China's response to sanctions, she said almost the same thing and then concluded again by saying that China should remember that how the history books will write about you, right? So this will, the moral of the story to me is that India has to strengthen up fast. We have to learn from this entire, chaos which is going on. We have to strengthen up hugely. There are huge lessons from this conflict and the way, nations are playing out against each other, the way they can blackmail or, twist your arms, etc. We need to strengthen up ASAP, which we are doing. But I think India should set up a high-level task committee, I think, which should urgently be tracking each and every, game which is going on. It will be a huge learning for the country, and we need that, please.
Well, certainly, at least the Ukraine war has taught one thing to every country, that nobody really sends foot soldiers if a conventional war does break out. But, Sanjay Kapoor, in an ever-changing tectonic world, end of the day, it's very interesting to see that the focus has come back on China. At least we can be very clear, going by the tone and tenor of the meeting, when it comes to Quad, the focus is on Indo-Pacific. Because if you look at the statements and analyze them very, very carefully, the statements which have been made by Scott Morrison, yes, he does mention Russia, he does mention about maintaining international law and order, but then once again he brings the focus back on China.
I entirely agree with you that China is at the center of the attention at the moment, and don't be taken in by the flurry of visits of all kinds of heads of state who are coming in. They're trying to pressurize India into taking sides. India has been smart enough, driven by history, driven by our geostrategic circumstances, to maintain a certain neutrality, which is being perceived as pro-Russian by the West, led by the US. But, the fact of the matter is that China is still the main issue. If Russia has to survive this entire crisis that it has created, driven by their own perception about what US was trying to make Ukraine do, then it has to rely on China, and China is playing safe. Please revisit the conversation that Mr. Biden, the US president, had with the President Xi Jinping. That in a way is very illuminating. It has been interpreted differently by both sides, but China has been extremely belligerent. In fact, if you revisit another statement, I would say, which has been made by the former ambassador to Delhi, Yu Licheng, where he says that they perceive the Quad as Asian NATO, and if China perceives it as Asian NATO, then it could pretty much respond the way Russia has responded to Ukraine, because Ukraine allowed Eastern expansion and enlargement of NATO in a certain way. It didn't happen, but that was what the design was. Yeah. So if China is also seeing a similar kind of thing happening, they have making of a threat and a making of a serious crisis. So in my reckoning, Mr. Morrison say whatever, but he remains poodle of the
Okay, you still okay. Point taken. We seem to be having some sort of technical difficulty there, but point taken. You're still skeptical. Madhav Nalapat sir, yes. Far as China is concerned, they are referring to Quadization NATO. NATO, of course, has very clearly shown that they don't send ground troops at all to save anyone but themselves. But, sir, in today's world, it isn't just about a conventional warfare. It is also an economic war. And it looks very clear that India and Russia want to, India and Australia, apologies, want to take this partnership forward to counter China economically also. As of now, the reality, the truth of the day is that China and Australia also they trade heavily. Australia is very, very heavily dependent on China. Last time, of course, we had the comprehensive strategic partnership which was signed in 2020. Do you think this time around, this visit is going to focus on reducing that economic dependence which both the countries, India and Australia, have on China, sir?
Well, I wouldn't take very seriously Scott Morrison's. I'm sure he's going to make some comments on Ukraine and Russia for his domestic audience and for the Europeans and, of course, for the US and Canada. But the fact is, Scott Morrison is a hard-headed leader who knows very well that the threat from Australia is not from Russia, it's from China. Yes. He also knows very well that India has to be part of any coalition that meets this threat. Both him and Prime Minister Kishida of Japan are very well aware of this. In fact, Japan is going to lose very heavily because of its pro-NATO stand. And that is that from the Sakhalin, they could have got very cheap oil. And they are denying their economy that very cheap oil, basically shooting themselves on in both feet to show their loyalty to the United States. I mean, I salute Japan for that. Since 1945, they have been completely loyal to the United States and they're continuing that relationship. But Kishida is a very shrewd leader. And look, the Japanese people are a very, if I may say so, great civilization culture. He knows very well the threat that Japan faces is from China. Yeah. It's not from any European theater. It's certainly not from Russia. It's, of course, now I don't know, given this approach that he has taken, but even then I doubt it. So I just like to say, this only shows. So the Prime Minister did not mention the Russia at all, Ukraine at all. I don't believe he's going to mention. Now, when Naftali Bennett comes, he's going to talk about Iran and terrorism. Prime Minister Modi will talk about terrorism, and that is going to be, I mean, they're playing to their domestic audiences and to their international audiences, and we are playing to our own self-interest. This policy, followed by the Indian government, is in the Indian self-interest, and whether it's Australia, US, or Japan, and of course the Europeans now increasingly, they understand that. So my view is that yes, people are going to keep coming and trying to pressurize India. Somehow the Europeans and the Americans never seem to learn that India doesn't respond well to pressure. After all these 70 years, they should have learned that. But these chaps seem to be very difficult to teach anything. So the fact is that India is pursuing the right policy, and I'm very confident it will continue, as Sanjay Kapoor says, on that policy.
Well, absolutely, sir. And Ambassador Baswati Mukherjee, ma'am, if you could come in here, as far as India is concerned, India is not going to be pressurized by anyone. That's been made very clear. In fact, Scott Morrison also seems to have accepted and even endorsed India's stand when it comes to the Russia-Ukraine crisis. But would you also, why the cautious skepticism of the other panelists, or do you think something concrete can come out of the meeting, especially when we say talk of countering China economically by the form of the free trade agreement, which we had been talking about, if not fully, at least partially, ma'am?
It's very important for me to explain through you to the wider audience and to my co-panelists that the India-Australia relation has come a very, very long way.
Yes.
And Australia's understanding of the dangers that China poses to the world order has also come a long way. Earlier, Australia, because of trade interests, used to fight shy of even the formation of the Quad. Today, Australia is one of the foremost, and Australia is also a member of AUKUS, which is a military alliance. So I would say that yes, I would agree with my co-panelists if he was speaking 10 years ago. But today, the Australia of today is a very, very different Australia. which is firmly anchored in the Indo-Pacific and which has a much better understanding of our strategic interests. I also wanted to say, because Sanjay got cut off, that what he said about the response of Xi Jinping to Biden is extremely important. It's like that English proverb, that when you get onto the back of a tiger, you can't control the course of the tiger. Well, he said something similar when he said, you put this on the neck, you take it off. In other words, he was telling Biden, you clean up your own mess, because when NATO, despite all assurances given to Russia, was trying to play up Ukraine, knowing fully well that Ukraine is not eligible for membership either of NATO or the EU according to their own rules of admission. It was a very sinister policy, and they've bitten off more than they can chew. I would like to add that among all the visitors who are coming here, we also have the Austrian foreign minister, who went first to Pakistan and then came to India. I do hope that doesn't mean that once again the West are trying to hyphenate Pakistan and India like they did earlier, because in that case it's important also to tell the West that we are concerned about China. We are not concerned about Iran or what he said about us yesterday, today or tomorrow. Pakistan is not a major threat to India. We can handle Pakistan. We need West support for China. And that's an important message that we need to give, and Quad is with us on that. Meenakshi.
But hasn't Scott Morrison, by moving away from Russia, when he even talks of international rule and order, and then talking about China, hasn't Australia made it amply clear that their focus remains China? And given the backdrop, as I said earlier, you cannot ignore the dragon in the room. Given the backdrop of this looming shadow of a ever-growing China, do you think that this meeting could be extremely significant, or it could help improve especially a trade and economic ties? We already have the comprehensive agreement. It looks like defense, military, we're also of course in Quad with them. That seems to be a little more sorted. But when it comes to a free trade agreement, if that doesn't happen, as I said, fully, partially, what do you see coming out of this virtual meeting when we speak of economic and trade ties between the two countries vis-a-vis an ever-growing China?
Thank you. A great question. But before going on to it, if you'll allow me, I'll take 30 seconds to, add on to something what Ambassador Mukherjee was saying. That's a very interesting thing. We should point at China as a primary danger rather than Pakistan or Islamic terror. You see, the term terror, for us, terrorism is a huge issue. But for American politics, terrorism, Islamic terrorism is not the #1 priority. For them, the #1 priority when they talk of terror is white racism. Okay, Biden said it in his opening speech. So why waste our capital, but definitely keep working on that, but why waste our capital on issues which we know are not, they are not resonating with. Now, secondly, yes, to the question, please. See, this meeting, I would definitely say is important, very important, given the background in which it is happening.
Yeah.
Giving the sharp things which have come into focus globally, what we are learning about, let's say, supply chains, the vulnerability of our, energy supplies, oil, gas, whichever be it, right? The availability of supply chains of, rare earth metals. Neon gas comes from Ukraine and palladium from Russia, which goes into ultimately making of semiconductor chips. About 70% of the market is originated from that region. So the semiconductor shortage that we've been seeing, which already is a huge economic impact, will grow in fact, but that's a side effect. Now, Australia is rich in some of these elements, okay, that we can look into. Also, clean energy, those kind of areas, more urgency, I think, in all of these areas. That would be one, something in the background also, given that what all is going on, let's kind of think creatively, even maybe. More creative thinking I think we can expect now, rather than, fuddy-duddy bureaucratic sense, okay, so and so. So I think these few things, then there's definitely in the trade aspect of Quad, Australia, India and Japan, these connectivities and Southeast Asia and all. For example, I know of a green hydrogen corridor that has been planned in a big way, right? Because India is rich in solar, which you need to make green hydrogen. Australia is also rich in solar for green hydrogen, and Japan, if it wants to go clean power, it has no sun. So in order to get energy which is green energy, it needs to import huge amounts of green hydrogen as of now, it seems, right? So those kind of strategic and deep linkages, I think, would also be and should also be immediately looked into.
And Sanjay Kapoor, just to take this forward, would you still be as cautious as you were earlier? While I understand, one need not be over optimistic about the visit of the heads of these Western countries, but certainly it does show the convergence of interest which is happening between Australia and India. End of the day, the common enemy seems to be China, and our trade dependence on China is quite large. Yes, most likely is a 1,500 crore investment, a large amount of money also going to be dedicated to buying lithium from Australia, which is going to be used for EVs, etc. That's futuristic and commendable. But end of the day, all eyes are going to be on how we reduce the dependence on China, and if at all this meeting, this virtual meeting, can bolster and boost trade ties between the two countries.
I'm not really sure about the competence and the capability of Australia to fill in for Australia. There are two different levels of power. China is $17 trillion power. I don't know what is the strength of Australia, which is not something that to really compare. Australia is important. I'm not saying it is not important. And as Ambassador Mukherjee said, it has grown over the last few years, and it has been able to contribute quite a bit, but it remains a power which has been left outside the system in a certain way. They're trying to get back. That is the geographical location, which continues to, in a way, be more relevant. But having said that, the Chinese problem is far more serious. It is something that you have to deal with it all the time. It is a way to manage both in terms of how you can take on militarily, like you have Ambassador Mukherjee rightly quoted this, the quote of President Xi Jinping, that if you have tied a collar around the neck of the tiger, you should have the ability to take it off. And he has made a direct attack at Biden. Biden is looking rather inadequate despite whatever he may be doing. He's trying to show muscle to show that he's as nationalist and aggressive as Trump was, and that gives him a chance to remain in power or allow the Democrats to make a winning in the November election, the midterm election. But the truth is that we are at the point where the world order is changing, and that cannot be denied. The constructs that US has come up with are being challenged in a manner that we can't even fathom. India has taken a point, is standing in the middle, trying to ascertain which way it should go. US and all its allies are trying to wean us away from the temptation or the geostrategic requirement of going with the RIC countries or with whomsoever. But India has clearly shown that it's a world where they would like to have different choices. They want to work
but
both
how,
with the West
sir? But how? I'm sorry, I'm interrupting you. How? Scott Morrison seems to have endorsed India's stand. He seems to have suggested that India is trying to broker peace between all the parties, and he sort of applauded our stand. Doesn't that go on to show how the Quad partners are ready to overlook even a difference on a big contentious issue like Russia because they want to be united against China?
I'm sure, I hope that what they're saying in the public domain is the same thing they are telling privately to the Prime Minister and his aides about the imperative to be with the Western Alliance and all that. Let's hope that this is what they stand for. But look at the Israel. We have been hyping the visit of the Prime Minister of Israel. Till now, the government of India has not even approved it. And you have the Prime Minister who keeps on repeating from Tel Aviv that he's coming to meet his brother. But look at our response. We are not very sure whether we want to entertain him right away. Okay,
Madhav, point taken, sir. Point taken.
Indian government is very cognizant of what is really happening. It's not that. Look at Victoria Nuland, who's coming here. She was the one who brought down the government of President Yankovic in Ukraine some years ago. She was distributing cakes at the Maidan in Kyiv.
Okay, I got your point, sir.
Here.
Okay, I've got your point. I take your point, sir, but let me just take this forward. Madhav Nalapat, sir. Do you not think we are downplaying the importance and significance of the meeting as well here? Yes, it's good to be cautious. Over optimism, I'm glad that you are flagging it, but at the same time, sir, 1,500 crore worth of investment, 900 plus crores, for clean energy. Yes, a full CESA may not happen, but improving trade ties between the two countries, even though the ground reality doesn't change, that Beijing is still till date Canberra's largest trade partner. But there are some optimistic points to look here, and it seems like that the relation is going in the right direction, isn't it, sir?
Well, I'd like to agree with you, and I'd like to say Scott Morrison is a very, very capable and competent leader. Well, whatever the reason, he has been, in a sense, pulled by the United States and the European powers to kind of once again trying to make Australia a European power. For a long time, Australia saw itself as European and, in fact, refused to welcome any migration from countries outside Europe and North America. That Australia changed several decades ago. Scott Morrison is definitely not going to change it back. Having said that, I'd like to point out that, yes, we're talking about RIC, but may I point out, any grouping that has Pakistan and China in its midst, and I'm not just talking about RIC, I'm talking about BRICS as well, and the SCO, well, I can assure you, there is no question about that. There's no question that these institutions are not going to help India face its main challenger, which is China. China and Pakistan working together will sabotage any such event. May I point out about Australia? Sanjay is quite right. It's relatively a small economy in dollar terms. But of course, the dollar today has delegitimized itself in large parts of the world. What is important is natural resources. Russia has got giant natural resources. Australia has got giant natural resources. And frankly, the decoupling of the need for essential resources, etc., from China, it is proceeding apace. The Chinese would like to stop that by responding, in a very superficial way. And that's frankly what Joe Biden wants. All he wants is something superficial so that he can win the next midterm election. He's not bothered about anything else except winning elections for his party. But the reality is these supply chains are growing. India, Australia and Japan and the United States are a very important part of these supply chains. And in my view, these three other partners of the Quad are going to be four square behind India. And even the United States, even Joe Biden, with his fixation on Cold War 1.0, is coming around to accept India's position that, look, our problem in the Indo-Pacific is China. Your problem, you think, is Russia. It's actually China. And I do believe Joe Biden is not entirely the novice that he's made out to be in some sections of the international media. He will understand that as well. So I think the Prime Minister, Narendra Modi, is standing firm on India's stand. It's a principled stand. It's a correct stand.
And that's why perhaps,
it's
right.
going to dilute.
And you're right, but it's the right stand and it is a correct stand. Perhaps that's why one after the other we are seeing leaders to begin with, like Scott Morrison, who are now endorsing and agreeing with the stand which India has taken. And also very interesting, you rightly said these leaders may have domestic compulsions, but yes, there is a grouping against China. And this meeting is certainly going to bolster our ties, trade ties as far as Australia and India are concerned. China still remains to be Canberra's biggest trading partner. To turn it upside down by one or two virtual meetings may not happen, but certainly it is a step in the right direction. A plethora of investment plans have been lined up in this meeting. It reiterates, according to me at least, the importance of India in the ever-emerging today's global order. On that note, I'd like to thank all my experts. It's been a riveting conversation. I wish I could have taken it forward, but that's all the time I have here. Thank you for watching.
For more such videos, subscribe to the NewsX YouTube channel, hit the bell icon.